a second. I know they're the same color, but I'm not about to try to change them. This bottom line is that profit line that I drew back in. Now, what happens is, think about how an industry operates. It starts out, there's one company, they got a great idea, or it's one company introduces a new product, whichever way you want to look at industry or product lifecycle. And then as you go up the thing, the demand increases. As demand increases, other people see this as a good idea, so they jump in, so you've got competition. So the number of companies, as you go up this curve, will increase. In other words, there might be 1 here, and then 3, and then 5, and then 10, and then 15, and then 20. And then what happens? Watch this demand curve. It starts clearing out. And so the number of companies starts dropping down again. You may go back to 15, 10, 12, whatever. Now, the point is, those are just representative numbers. That's just generally what happens. In that little area right there, that competitive turbulence area, what I'm showing you is the demand curve starts dropping off. And basically what happens is with companies is before the demand starts dropping off, you're concerned with growth and acquisition and moving and getting things done. When it starts dropping off, then you start being concerned with efficiencies. So it's almost like a company has to be concerned with effectiveness early and then efficiency later. And that's because you're growing. And when you're growing, that hides a lot of ills. Now, this is a consumer-oriented life cycle for a durable good. And if you see what happens, the reason the number of companies goes down, they go down, once you get past the competitive turbulence area, is simply because the profitability drops off. You can see that in the bottom line. Profitability drops off, and this is when mergers and acquisitions typically happen. We'll start seeing mergers and acquisitions. They don't go out of business. But what happens is they're not efficient. Economy of scale kicks in as a big thing that's really important during the more mature stage of the life cycle. And if a company that isn't set up for that, doesn't have a lot of market share, they're not as viable all of a sudden. And so somebody comes in and buys them out. And so that's why typically they don't go out of business. They get combined. And so this is also the way industries become more concentrated. So you almost always, if you're seeing a product or a service that's got a fairly long life cycle without having to be major changes made in it, you'll see something happen like this. It wouldn't surprise me at all, although it's certainly not predestined. It wouldn't surprise me at all if your tennis shoe thing didn't look something like this over time. That's just what happens. It has nothing to do with anything I'm doing. It's just the way a life cycle changes that doesn't have a lot of major product or service disruption.
But so you're saying we can do mergers and acquisitions?
I wish you could. I tried to do that for years with this thing. And the bookkeeping on my end is so damn hard, I can't figure out how to do it. Really, I'm not smart enough. I wish we could. I really wish we could. I've tried to, the guys that developed this is like the 20th iteration of this thing. And 100 years ago, I actually competed with them on something. They were just so much better than me, I quit doing it and started using this one. And I keep telling them that what they need to do is actually do a follow-on to this thing where you could do that, where it's more about the financial side of it, about making the deals. But it's too hard to do. I know why they can't do it. Okay, so I just sort of did that. Now, let's talk about S-curves. Anybody know what an S-curve is? You know what I'm talking about when I say S-curve. How many of you know what an S-curve is? Okay. Some engineers in here, clearly. Okay. So an S-curve is a phenomenon that happens to any technology. And it's important if you have technology in your business model. Now, if you don't have a lot of technology in your business model, this doesn't matter. But this kind of goes back to what I'm trying to tell you that we need to do. What I'm trying to give you is basically a framework for deciding how to look at a business situation and questions to ask. Okay, so question one, is it a durable consumer good? If it is, then it's probably going to have a demand curve that looks like that. You're probably going to have to deal with those profit curves that look like that. That's question one. Question two, is there a lot of technology in it? If there is a lot of technology in your business model, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that you're selling technology. I'm sure Sears and J.C. Penney didn't think there was a lot of technology in their business model. But the technology came along and their business model couldn't keep up. So it's not necessarily what's in your current business model, it's how you can be affected by technological change. So you've got to think a little much broader than you're currently thinking. Because think about what organizations know how to do. I talked about this last week. Organizations know how to handle convergent change. They know how to handle small amounts, plus or minus 15%. They can survive it. When they start getting more than that, they don't survive very well. So part of what you've got to do is almost thinking of, I hate to use the words outside the box, but think in an unusual way for you. Try to get somebody that's not familiar with your industry to ask the right questions sometimes. Is technological change going to matter? Now, why does it matter? And why does this idea matter? Well, it's because you need to know where you are and if this S-curve phenomenon actually matters. So let's take a standard product that everybody's used, a computer chip that's in a laptop or something like that. If you went back to the early days of that, back to the 8088 chip or whatever, and you started drawing a curve that looked at the performance yield and the total resources you employ. In other words, what I'm trying to say here is you started out with this technology and then you started developing it. As you spent more and more money developing it over time, the performance will increase. Okay? So let's say this was the baseline, and let's do that again. It'll look something like that for any given technology. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important for two reasons. One is you need to know where you are on that, if there's any technology in that, in your system, in your business model. And secondly, it's important because one of the most interesting things about the whole S-curve phenomenon is it doesn't matter what technology you're talking about. If you track the performance of tire cord in your automobile tires over time, you get something that looks like this. If you track the efficiency of an internal combustion engine over time, you get something that looks like this. If you track the way computer modem worked, or back when we had modems, it would look like this. The point is for a given class of technology, you typically will get an S-curve. Now, what's important about it is where you are on this S-curve. Where are you on this thing? Because if you're here, then yeah, spend money developing that, and you've got a long way to go. But if you're here, you want to keep developing, chasing that type of business model that uses that level of technology. So this is an important question to ask yourself. Where are you? Because what tends to happen, and I'll do a real-life example in a minute to explain this. What tends to happen is when you get into this area up here, typically another technology comes along. And what you will find with it is it'll start at this baseline and it'll take off. And so what you really, from a strategy standpoint, you want to jump from one technology to the other. And the question of when to do that, how to do that, is something companies that are in the technology business, think Intel, think somebody like that, they spend a lot of time doing this. This is their whole business model, basically, is trying to decide what the next technology is. But for those of us that use it and don't invent it, what we have to do is do a lot of environmental scanning to make sure we understand what's coming along and that we don't do something like, Sears did or something like that. And not understand that there's a shift coming here. And that's what tends to happen to companies. Remember last week I talked about the largest companies in the world, if you go back 100 years, 80 years, whatever, very few of them, less than 20% of them are still around. And these were the companies that had all the money in the world. So what they do wrong? And the answer is they didn't do much wrong. The world changed and they didn't change with it. And so that's sort of the reason that I'm going through this. Now, I'll give you go a little further in this. I didn't talk about that. The reason that curve on top, the reason that you get the S phenomenon is ordinary.